Have you ever been standing at a pharmacy counter, handed the cashier your prescription, and watched their face as they typed in the price? $400. For a small yellow pen. Maybe you asked them to run it again. Maybe you stood there doing the math in your head, wondering if you'd heard wrong. You hadn't. And here's the thing that nobody in the pharmaceutical industry wants you to sit with. The actual drug inside that pen costs somewhere between $1 and $3 to manufacture. The molecule itself hasn't changed since the 1970s. In some cases, since 1904. So, before we get into it, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely find this worth knowing. Let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what you last paid at the pharmacy. It's always eye-opening. Now let's get into it. So where does the other $397 go? That's exactly what we're going to find out today, right here on Pharma Facts. To understand the EpiPen price, we first have to understand what's actually inside it. An EpiPen is not a complicated device. It is a preloaded syringe inside a plastic shell, designed so that even a panicking parent or a terrified child can use it correctly. You pull off the cap, press it hard against the outer thigh, and it automatically injects a precise dose of a drug called epinephrine directly into the muscle. Epinephrine is just another name for adrenaline. Your body already makes it. Every single time you get a fright, feel a rush, or slam the brakes on the highway, your adrenal glands are flooding your bloodstream with the exact same molecule. Now, as a medicine, epinephrine has been around for a very long time. It was first synthesized in a laboratory in 1904, over a century ago. It has been on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines for decades. That is a list the world's top health body uses to identify drugs so fundamental, so basic, that every healthcare system on Earth should have access to them. And here is the number that matters. A standard hospital vial of injectable epinephrine, containing more than 3 times the dose in an EpiPen, costs hospitals less than $5. Sometimes less than $1. The drug is not expensive. The drug has never been expensive. So what are you actually paying $400 for? To answer that, we have to go back to 2007. That year, a pharmaceutical company called Mylan acquired the rights to sell the EpiPen in the United States. At that point, the EpiPen cost about $57 for a 2-pack. $57. Not cheap, but not outrageous. Then Mylan started raising the price. Not once, not twice, 17 times over the next 9 years. By 2016, that same 2-pack, the same device, the same drug, the same plastic casing, cost $608. That is a 600% increase. In under a decade, on a product that had not meaningfully changed. Containing a molecule that had not changed in a century. Now, drug companies raise prices all the time. But what made the EpiPen situation different was a combination of 3 things happening at the exact same time. A monopoly, a captive market, and a system that allowed both to exist unchallenged. Let's look at each one. First, the monopoly. When Mylan took over the EpiPen, there were actually other epinephrine auto-injectors on the American market. The main competitor was a device called the Auvi-Q, made by Sanofi. Then, in 2015, Sanofi recalled every single Auvi-Q in the United States. The recall was legitimate. There were concerns about inaccurate dosing, but the effect was immediate. Overnight, Mylan had the market almost entirely to themselves. There was a generic version in development. But getting FDA approval for a product that is both a drug and a mechanical device is a notoriously slow and complicated process. Mylan had years of runway with no real competition. But here is where the story takes a turn that rarely gets reported. During this same period, Mylan spent millions of dollars on federal lobbying. And part of that lobbying effort was directed at a very specific goal: getting the EpiPen written into emergency legislation at the state level. Laws that required schools to stock epinephrine auto-injectors in case of allergic reactions. Sounds like a public health measure. And it was. But some of those laws specifically named the EpiPen by brand. Not just an epinephrine auto-injector. The EpiPen. Mylan had essentially lobbied its own product into a government-mandated customer base. Schools across America were now legally required to buy the product whose price Mylan controlled. That is not illegal. But it is a masterclass in how pharmaceutical pricing power gets built quietly, behind the scenes, while everyone else is looking away. Now let's talk about the captive market, because this is the part that really explains the numbers. Roughly 3.6 million Americans are prescribed epinephrine auto-injectors. Many of them are children with severe allergies, to peanuts, to bee stings, to shellfish. The stakes are not abstract. During a severe allergic reaction, the throat can close in minutes. Without epinephrine, the outcome can be fatal. Think of it like walking on deep snow. If you need to get across, and the only bridge costs $400, you pay for the bridge. You don't stand at the edge of the water calculating whether it's worth it. You pay. Economists call this inelastic demand. When a product is keeping your child alive, price sensitivity drops to almost zero. Mylan's pricing strategy was built directly on that reality. And the math compounds quickly. Many families were told to carry 2 EpiPens, one for school, one for home. Some needed 4 or 6, to cover every location where the child spent time. Add insurance plans with high deductibles, where the full sticker price comes out of pocket before coverage kicks in, and you have families spending thousands of dollars a year on a drug that costs pennies to manufacture. The data from that period shows that Mylan's estimated net profit on each 2-pack, after discounts to insurers, was somewhere between $100 and $160. The company was pulling over $1 billion a year from a single product containing a drug invented before the First World War. In the summer of 2016, the story exploded. It started on social media. Parents posting pictures of pharmacy receipts. Nurses and doctors expressing public disbelief. The press picked it up. Congressional hearings followed. Mylan's CEO was called before the United States Senate. Under enormous pressure, Mylan announced 2 things. First, they introduced a generic version of the EpiPen, priced at around $300, made by Mylan, using the same device. A price cut of about 50%, which still left the product at 5 times its original cost, containing a drug that had not changed. Second, they expanded patient assistance programs, coupons and rebates to reduce out-of-pocket costs for lower-income families. Healthcare analysts largely described both moves as image management rather than structural change. The actual turning point came later, when real generic competitors finally cleared the FDA approval process. By 2018 and 2019, true generics began hitting pharmacies. The price started to fall. By the early 2020s, generic epinephrine auto-injectors were available for under $100, some for under $30. The moment real competition appeared, the price collapsed. That pattern, monopoly pricing followed by collapse the instant competition arrives, is not unique to the EpiPen. It repeats across the American pharmaceutical market, drug after drug, decade after decade. And that brings us to the bigger picture. Because the EpiPen story is not really about one company, or one CEO, or one bad actor. It is a case study in how the system is built. Here are the documented facts. The United States has no federal mechanism to cap or negotiate the price of brand-name drugs sold to privately insured patients. Every other wealthy country, Canada, the UK, Germany, Australia, Japan, has some version of a regulatory body that evaluates whether a drug's price is justified by its clinical value. The US does not. Not for the private market. Patents and regulatory exclusivity create legal monopolies. This is intentional. The argument being that temporary monopoly profits fund future research and innovation. That is a reasonable argument for genuinely new drugs. It is a harder argument to make for a device housing a molecule that has been in use since 1904. And the lobbying system allows pharmaceutical companies to shape the very laws that determine their customer base, including which products schools must stock and which drugs get written into government procurement contracts. None of this was hidden. None of it was illegal. The pricing history was public. The lobbying records were filed. The congressional testimony was broadcast live. What the EpiPen case did was force all of it into a single, unavoidable story. Here is the number to carry with you. A hospital vial of epinephrine. Less than $5. 3 times the dose. The same molecule. Available to emergency rooms across America every single day. The drug was never the expensive part. The expensive part was the absence of competition, the presence of fear, and a system with no mechanism to ask whether the price made any sense at all. That is not an opinion. That is what the pricing records, the lobbying filings, the Senate testimony, and the market data all show. The EpiPen story is now almost 20 years old. Generic competitors eventually drove the price down on this specific product. But the structure that made the EpiPen possible, the patent strategies, the device bundling, the state-level lobbying, the captive patients, that structure has not changed. Right now, it is happening again on other drugs. The names are different. The mechanism is the same. This channel exists to follow the data, trace the money, and explain exactly how the American pharmaceutical system works, in plain English, without the spin. If that is the kind of story you want to understand, subscribe. And if you know someone who has ever stood at a pharmacy counter and felt that specific confusion when they heard the price, send them this video. Not because I'm telling you what to do, but because knowing how the system works is the first step to seeing it clearly. I'll see you in the next one.